Top of the morning to you, and welcome to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines: one dead in third consecutive drone attack in Kyiv. UK Defense Secretary Ben Wallace says the United Kingdom not Amazon delivery service for weapons to Ukraine. Plus, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres sends Vladimir Putin proposal to keep Black Sea grain deal alive. Thank you for joining us. Ukrainian anti-aircraft units engaged attacking drones for the third consecutive night in and around Kyiv, triggering fires and falling debris in several districts and killing at least one person. Mayor Vitaly Klitschko, writing on Telegram, says the body of one resident was recovered when emergency services put out a fire in the capital's historic Podil district. Mr. Klitschko reported a fire in an apartment building in Podil and said 2 people were injured when debris damaged one story of an apartment building in Donetsk district in the east of the city. The head of Kyiv's military administration, Serhiy Popko, describes the assault as a mass attack by Iranian-made Shahed drones that it had approached from different directions. At least 5 civilians, including 1 child, were injured as a result of Russian attacks on the Ukrainian southeastern city of Zaporizhia on Wednesday. Deputy Mayor Alexander Vlasyuk told local media that 6 civilians were injured. He added that shrapnel will be examined in order to identify the type of the weapons that were used. The injured were taken away in an ambulance to be attended to while first aid was being administered. On Monday, a Russian attack on a humanitarian and distribution point in Zaporizhia region killed 7 people. Ukraine's military is conducting a counter-offensive to try to retake Russia-occupied territory of Zaporizhia region. Russian and Ukrainian soldiers continued to exchange fire on Wednesday as the conflict went on, with each striking the other's military targets that include munition depots, warplanes, and air defense systems. The Russian Defense Ministry issued a war report on Wednesday, saying in the past 24 hours, the Russian army repelled several attacks by the Ukrainian army in the directions of Kupiansk, Lyman, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, hitting Ukrainian ammunition depots and shooting down Ukrainian Mi-24 helicopters. On the same day, the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces also issued a report saying the Russian army continued to pool its forces in the directions of Kupiansk, Lyman, Bakhmut, and Marinka, as well as Avdiivka. The Ukrainian army struck Russian command posts, air defense missile systems, electronic warfare systems, and other targets, and air-raided Russian positions, according to the report. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden has accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of having a craven lust for land and power, and pledged that the U.S.-led NATO alliance will not falter in supporting Ukraine against Russian aggression. Speaking at the end of the 2-day meeting of NATO leaders in Vilnius, Lithuania, President Biden commended the people of Lithuania and heralded the addition of Finland to the alliance and the impending admission of its neighbor, Sweden. President Biden also says President Putin had badly underestimated the resolve of the military alliance. According to him, NATO is stronger, more energized, and more united than ever in its history. UK Defense Secretary Ben Wallace has said that the United Kingdom is not an Amazon delivery service for weapons to Ukraine, suggesting Kyiv could be more grateful to its allies in the face of Russia's invasion. Speaking to the British media on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Lithuania's capital Vilnius, he says, in his words, there is a slight word of caution, which is, whether we like it or not, people want to see gratitude. Mr. Wallace also recalled that after receiving a list of weapons requests from Ukraine last year, He told the officials in Kiev, "I am not Amazon." The Deputy Secretary of Russia's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, is again warning that increased assistance for Ukraine from NATO members brings the threat of a third world war closer. Medvedev said pledges of military aid from the military alliance to Kiev will not deter Russia from achieving its goals in Ukraine. Commenting as the first day of the NATO summit in Lithuania wrapped up, Mr. Medvedev said that pledges of military aid from the Western Defense Alliance to Kiev will not deter Russia from achieving its goals in Ukraine. Russia's foreign minister issued similar warnings that Moscow had no intention to end its war. Now, Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky says the meeting with NATO leaders was positive in spite of his disappointment about the lack of a timetable to receive an invite to join the alliance. The United States and global allies unveiled new security assurances for Ukraine at the NATO summit on Wednesday, designed to bolster the country's defenses against Russia over the long haul, while Kiev strives for membership in the alliance. President Zelensky says he believes that Ukraine will be in NATO as soon as the security situation is stabilized. Ukraine has been pushing for rapid membership while fighting a Russian invasion unleashed in February 2022 that has killed tens of thousands of people and displaced millions. Instead, a declaration by the G7 group of world's most industrialized countries launched a framework for bilateral negotiations to provide military and financial support, intelligence sharing, and a promise of immediate steps if Russia should attack again. The first sitting of a new NATO-Ukraine Council was also held on Wednesday, a new format designed to tighten cooperation between Kiev and the 31-nation alliance. President Vladimir Zelensky has informed his people that the latest NATO summit has put Ukraine on the road to membership in the alliance. After meeting with NATO leaders and guests in the Lithuanian capital, Vilnius, President Zelensky said in his nightly video address that Ukraine had established a foundation of security for the first time since its transition to independent nationhood. Zelensky reaffirmed statements he made at the summit that any doubts of ambiguity about whether Ukraine will be in NATO have been removed. Meanwhile, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has proposed that Russian President Vladimir Putin extend the deal, allowing the safe Black Sea export of grain from Ukraine in return for connecting a subsidiary of Russia's agricultural bank to the SWIFT international payment system. Russia has threatened to ditch the grain deal, which expires this Monday, because several demands to dispatch its own grain and fertilizer abroad have not been met. The last two ships traveling under the Black Sea Agreement are currently loading cargo at the Ukrainian port of Odessa ahead of the deadline. A key demand by Moscow is the reconnection of the Russian Agricultural Bank to the SWIFT international payment network. It was cut off by the European Union in June 2022 over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, an EU spokesperson said that in May, the EU was not considering reinstating Russian banks. However, according to several sources, the EU is also considering connecting to SWIFT, a subsidiary of the Russian bank, to allow specifically for grain and fertilizer transactions as per the agreement. The European Commission did not immediately respond to a request for comment.
As part of his ongoing efforts in this regard, the Secretary General yesterday sent a letter to the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, outlining a proposal aiming to harmonize the vital further implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding and with the vital need to keep the Black Sea Initiative operational. The objective is to remove hurdles affecting financial transactions through the Russian Agricultural Bank, a major concern expressed by the Russian Federation, and simultaneously allowed for the continuing flow of Ukrainian grain through the Black Sea. His overriding concern remains for vulnerable people around the world who stand to lose the most from any unraveling of the Istanbul arrangements and a likely subsequent rise in global food and fertilizer prices. The Secretary General remains engaged with all relevant parties on this issue and expresses his willingness to further engage on his proposal with the Russian Federation.
In that letter outlining a proposal, I just want to know, are there any details about that one, or is just the one you just mentioned about the transaction?
There are more details in the letter. For, I think, obvious reasons, we don't want to get into operational details at this point. But I think, as you know, the issue of the facilitation of payments of the fertilizer and of grain through the Russian Agricultural Bank has been a challenge, one we've been trying very hard through Rebecca Greenspan's efforts to address, but remains a challenge.
The Russian Navy has held a launch ceremony for a new missile cruiser for its Black Sea fleet based in Crimea. The new missile ship called Cyclone, which is reportedly capable of launching 8 cruise missiles at once, was launched in Kerch in the eastern part of the Russian-controlled Crimea Peninsula. Since the beginning of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which Russia calls a special military operation, Russia has actively been using cruise missiles to strike targets on Ukrainian territory. Ukraine has repeatedly accused Russia of targeting civilian infrastructure with missiles. Russia says it only attacks targets that are used by the Ukrainian army. The Wagner mercenary group is completing its handover of weapons to Russia's regular armed forces. The Russian Defense Ministry is making this statement more than 2 weeks after the group staged a brief armed mutiny. In the statement, accompanied by video showing tanks, rockets, and other heavy weapons, the ministry said Wagner had transferred more than 2,000 pieces of equipment and over 2,500 tons of ammunition. If genuine, the handover is the most concrete sign to date that Wagner, whose fighters have waged some of the fiercest and bloodiest battles for Russia's war in Ukraine, is pulling out of combat operations. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden says he's confident that the United States will be able to sell the F-16 aircraft to Turkey. President Biden made the comments to reporters as he left the NATO summit in Lithuania. Turkey, which has been the main stumbling block to Sweden's path to NATO, has been seeking to buy the F-16 fighter jets and modernize its kits for its existing warplanes. Staying with U.S. President Joe Biden, his nominee to become the U.S. Army's Chief of Staff, General Randy George, believes Ukraine will benefit from the U.S. providing ATACM long-range missiles. Now, speaking to a Senate committee in the U.S. during his confirmation hearing, he also pointed out that the system will have the ability to attack deeper targets. Kyiv has long sought the U.S. Army tactical missile system, arguing the missiles will help it to strike Russian invasion forces far behind the front lines. But the missiles are limited in supply and have not been amongst the weapon systems that the Pentagon has suggested for nearing approval for delivery, as it approves other weapons like cluster bombs and Abrams tanks for Ukraine. You're watching Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Senior Russian general in Ukraine dismissed. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome to the Soul for More stretch of our special coverage of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A high-profile Russian general is in command of forces in occupied southern Ukraine says he's been dismissed from his post after accusing the Defense Ministry of betraying Russian soldiers by not providing sufficient support. General Ivan Popov was the commander of the 58th Combined Arms Army, which has been involved in heavy fighting in Zaporizhzhia region. He is one of the most senior officers involved in the Russian campaign in Ukraine. In a voice note, General Popov said that he raised questions about the lack of counter-battery combat, the absence of artillery reconnaissance stations, and the mass deaths and injuries of soldiers from enemy artillery. The public resignation or dismissal of such a senior officer amidst an open dispute over the conduct of the Russian campaign is unprecedented. Now, Laddie Williams, our business correspondent, joins us to give us an overview of how the world of business is impacted by the conflict in Ukraine and Russia. Laddie, good morning.
Good morning.
I think more controversial, or just as controversial, in the dismissal of this Russian general is the fact that he's saying it by himself to the media, and this, putting it in the public space. And such a high-ranking official to do that is just echoing what the Prigozhin, the Wagner mercenary group, was doing in the first place. So it's something that
quite
is
incredible.
Obviously.
That means he was kind of right, talking about Prigozhin.
No, well, it does mean that there is, to put it mildly, indiscipline of some sort.
Exactly.
In the disgruntled elements in the Russian army for senior. Prigozhin is not a Russian soldier.
Yeah, mercenary.
This is not just a soldier. He's a general.
Right.
And he's saying that he's been dismissed. It was found in the voice note. So
it's quite unprecedented, though.
Indeed, unprecedented. But let's go now to the business of the day.
Right.
And let's begin with the SWIFT arrangements, where the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has proposed to avoid Russia leaving the Black Sea grain deal.
Exactly.
That they connect a Russian agricultural bank to the SWIFT payment system for the deal to continue to go through.
Exactly.
So it appears they're beginning to make concessions.
Yeah, we're seeing some moves now, and definitely because next week we're practically close to next week now, 17th of July. We're supposed to get that renewal, for the grain deal, and definitely we're seeing the UN trying to ramp up support now at this time to make sure that we get that renewal, next week, because a lot is hanging on the renewal, because at the end of the day, we've seen how, the Black Sea grain deal has helped get, Ukrainian grains, out, to countries that actually need those grains. And right now with the sanctions, we've seen on, Russia, from the financial, angle, not being able to, access the global financial space, being excluded from SWIFT. We've seen how Russia has tried to build their central bank digital currency, trying to, ramp up speed for that so that they can make their international payments, seamlessly, get it decentralized, moving away from what we've called the great de-dollarization. We've seen a lot of countries trying to move away from, the US dollar for, settlements and payment, in the global market. So at this point, Russia have been making demands, and they're saying, you know what, connect our agricultural ministry to that SWIFT network. At least give us something, so that we can allow this, deal to go through, because it doesn't make sense. Give us a word about the SWIFT
payment system.
Right.
Why is that so important? How does that work to facilitate payments?
Yeah, it's important because with SWIFT, it's a simple system. It's global. Everyone's plugged into it, so they can, get your settlements in. You send your dollars there for payments, and it's processed. Your payments are processed through that, with a bunch of banks, all connected to that globally. Okay. So that helps, to get your payments out. And being excluded from that is a huge, huge deal, because imagine not being able to, make payments for your imports, through the system everybody, globally uses. So that is a big,
is that like not being able to use a credit card?
Exactly. It's like not being able to, use the bank. Just imagine you're not able to, send payments, through the bank. You always have to go, find a way to take cash, to make your payments. You see how seamless it is, sending money, to your people, and you're sending money to the village or something. That is what, SWIFT does, for countries, allows them to make payment, internationally. So at the end of the day, we're still seeing, Russia, even though they're starting to get, this little win, I'll call it that, at this point, because if they're able to be connected, back to that, back to the SWIFT network, they'll be able to sell their fertilizer, and make payments, because it doesn't make sense for them. They're allowing the grain deal, but still they cannot make, sales with their own grain.
But it's just one bank that they're allowing back on SWIFT.
Yeah, it's just one bank.
If the Russians agree, do you think that's enough?
So it is enough. It is enough for them to be able to get their revenue from selling their fertilizer abroad. So it is what they need right now, because they are squeezed at this point. They've not been able to sell to the countries they normally sell to. They've been limited to just China and India. So at the end of the day, they need this because if they're allowing Ukraine make revenue from their grains, they also want to make revenue from their grains. So that's the deal, and it's quite good to see that the UN Secretary General is actually looking at maybe they should just get them back in, to the SWIFT network, and then we see a renewal hopefully next week. But investors and traders are definitely watching out for what happens next, because
so just a few days for us to know whether the Black Sea grain deal will be extended
or not. Yeah.
Okay, now the much anticipated CPI, that's the Consumer Price Index,
right,
for June, declined from 4% to 3% for the United States.
Yeah.
Was it in line with the expectations?
Yes, it actually beat expectations, and all eyes, we've been all looking forward to that CPI data for June, because that data is going to determine what the U.S. Fed is going to do next at their next meeting. I'm talking about the rate hikes. They've been raising rates since 2022, trying to tame inflation. So now we're seeing incredible improvement, with their inflation rate down from 4% now to 3%. And we got the Dow Jones estimate, they were looking at about 3.1%. So it is quite impressive. And, majorly what's driving that, basically, we've seen prices of used cars, come down in the U.S., airfares are also coming down, and food inflation was softer, this time. So that's what, really drove that. And definitely, we've seen the rate hikes. They've been raising rates since 2022, and that is, beginning to take effect at this time. But now, this is giving some kind of forward guidance, to investors, that maybe at the next meeting, we might see another pause, because we saw a pause in the last meeting. Or if we're going to see a hike, it will be a really small one. And definitely that is the kind of thing investors are looking to see, because a smaller rate hike, definitely is risk on, sentiment is definitely back on.
Is it too artificial, means of taming inflation? Are there any disadvantages to this?
Obviously, out this, we saw in the first quarter of 2023, we saw how the banks, how that impacted, banks in the U.S., some of Silicon Valley Bank, we saw how that impacted them. It was the rate hikes, at the end of the day. They couldn't, make payments for bonds that, that they had, aboard, and definitely.
So who's to say it can't happen
once there's a rate hike. So now that we've seen a pause, at the last meeting, that means, the rates are not going to be as aggressive, So now, going forward, what would help the banking sector definitely would be some kind of, cut, going forward. By the end of the day, the U.S. Fed is still, quite defensive at this point. Even though they're seeing, this reduction about 3%, they are still, watching carefully to make sure that they don't cut prematurely or pause prematurely, so that the the inflation doesn't start rising again, because it could start, rising again aggressively. So at the end of the day, we're seeing all of that, good numbers coming out yesterday has impacted the oil markets. We've seen oil prices, oil prices are up today. Brent got to about $80, this morning. Even though we've been seeing from Monday and Tuesday, prices were quite subdued, but we saw a big jump because at the end of the day, expecting little rate hikes or a pause is good for demand. And definitely we know oil traders are looking for whatever is going to boost, demand going forward. That's for oil. And that's why we're seeing prices, rise this morning.
Very quickly, consumer inflation is a problem in Russia.
Right.
Accelerating in June.
Yes, yeah. So on the flip side, in Russia, we're seeing inflation actually, rising at this time, and it's we're seeing, shortages, employment shortages right now in Russia. We're seeing the ruble, weakening. All of that is playing into the inflation at this point, and we're seeing, rising prices. And when they invaded Ukraine, the last time they had to raise rates about 20%. Because at the end of the day, we saw inflation, sky high, when that happened. So now it's showing that the next move the central bank is going to make in Russia is to actually raise rates, because they don't want to.
Just like what the U.S. is doing.
Exactly. They don't want it to go past their target of about 4%. That's talking about Russia. So, yeah, prices are rising, right there. We're seeing real data coming out there.
Thank you, Laddie. Our business correspondent, Laddie Williams, who you will do well to please join him on Business Morning after this program.
Exactly.
Many thanks, Laddie.
Okay.
From one discussion to another, we'd like to speak now to national security risk strategist and former British police officer, Mr. Vincent Yekwelu, who is coming to us virtually from Enugu from Anambra State. Good morning and welcome to the program.
It's okay. It's okay. Good morning.
When I hear cruise prior to this conflict, when I hear the word cruise, I think about Tom Cruise. I think about cruise ships, a luxury cruise. I don't think about cruise missiles, but that's what the Ukrainian government is doing a lot of in receiving the Storm Shadow cruise missiles from the UK. And now there's a promise from France that they're going to donate, they're going to also add to their deployment of weapons for Ukraine, Scalp missiles, which we hear goes in the range of 250 kilometers, with the ability to strike deep into the beyond the Russian front lines. And now the United States has jumped on the bandwagon, and they're saying they want to send missiles as well to Ukraine. As this continues to happen, what are your concerns?
Number one, just like you've heard about cruise, I've also heard about hypersonic missiles. I've also heard about cluster bombs, because all this terminology are getting very interesting in the current war ongoing. I've also heard about nations like Turkey now seeing the war as a platform to play a smartphone on allowing Sweden to join the NATO, with the game plan that the EU should also allow Turkey to join the European Union. So the whole game is up for let the best man. It's a chess game. The truth of the matter is the world would struggle to have this war go into the upcoming winter. This is July. At the end of next month of August, the chills of winter would have come upon the Eastern Europe. And the fact remains that the world cannot sit down and listen to these ideas of Patriot missiles, storm shadows, cluster bombs, hypersonic missiles. That war needs to stop, because lives are being lost. Human beings are being punished. They need to end this war, because Russia obviously cannot sleep with two eyes closed. However, Ukraine are not even sleeping at all. We saw Mr. Zelensky in Lithuania making every deals he can get. The truth of the matter is, Ukraine is going to elections about February, March next year. What will he survive the elections next year? President Biden is facing elections next year. If he qualifies to be the Democratic candidate, would he qualify? Germany, the biggest economy in the whole of Europe and the third in the world after USA, China, Japan, I think the fourth in the world, has gone into recession. UK, that used to be number 5, has been taken over by India. UK is now number 6. The truth is the war is eating up the economy of the world. The funds that are meant for the people, the war going on in Sudan, nobody cares about them. The people stranded between the borders of Libya and Tunisia, nobody is talking about them. I think the United Nations need to step in and end this war.
Okay, Mr. Yekolu, it's good you mentioned that about the politicking and the deals going on in Lithuania. Now that Turkey has shifted its position, seemingly it's not so concerned anymore, at least as far as the accession to Sweden goes, about their concerns about harboring PKK anti-Turk elements in Sweden. And now they're saying that they are agreeing to have Turkey join NATO and give that ratification. Also, in the same breath, we now find that the United States has agreed to sell F-16s to Turkey, which is something they've always wanted. So it's interesting that you mentioned that. But now let's look at the cluster munitions. And is there a danger that this will become a cluster munition war for the front lines in the trenches? Because a certain Ukrainian soldier said recently that he was very happy that the US is donating cluster munitions. He said in his words that you don't have anywhere to hide, that the cluster bombs, when you drop them from the sky, they open up and they spread everywhere and there's nowhere to hide. And it's very good for light artillery vehicles and it destroys people as well. But now that Russia has anticipated all of that, and they also have their own cluster munitions, is there a danger that this will become a more brutal war for the front lines, and it may not serve the purposes that Ukraine wants if Russia deploys the same extent of cluster munitions?
Thank you so much. There is, one unique thing about this particular war is that the news coming out of Ukraine and Russia is not only for the Russians to tell us or for the Ukrainians to tell us. Right now, the world has become more technologically driven, that we get men and women on ground that gives us first-class information. The truth is, it's on record that Russia has used cluster bombs already in this war. It's also on record that Ukraine has also used cluster bombs against the people of Donetsk and Luhansk. Now, we have to be very careful about this. Cluster bombs are not that dangerous even in the war front, but it's even more dangerous after it's been deployed and even after the war. Cluster bombs are bomblets. So you can package bomblets of thousands of bomblets into a big missile and launch them, and they explode bomblet by bomblet. But the danger is some of them does not explode. Now, based on research coming from the USA has about 40% dudes. So dudes are part of cluster bombs, part of the cluster bomb bomblet that does not explode immediately on deployment. Rather, they stay on the floor, they stay on the garden, on the footpath, on the main road, on the water bodies, and anytime a child picks it up, it could go boom. Anytime a vehicle or a motorcyclist or a human being march upon them, it goes boom. Now, the truth is, cluster bomb is a no-go area. We cannot even tolerate or even allow the USA to choose and pick what is right for humanity in face of this crisis. Russia must, not should, must stop using cluster bombs. Ukraine must stop using cluster bombs. And USA should not even dream of sending these cluster bombs to any country. How would the USA feel if cluster bombs are dropped in their own country? We as human beings can pick it after 2 years, after 3 years, and boom, somebody gets crippled. There are ideas that we cannot allow the USA to pick what is right or what is wrong.
Well, it
I
appears
know how
that
the
that
USA
horse, sorry, Mr. Wickel, it appears that horse has left the stable. That ship has sailed because they're going to deploy them. It's part of their package, the most recent arms package that they're sending to Ukraine. So what can nations do to deter both nations from, and also the fact that Ukraine has used, and Russia as well has used cluster bombs, mean Ukraine probably doesn't have enough in stock. So they're going to have this great tranche of cluster bombs. So what can nations do to further buttress this position?
Yeah, obviously, even the fact that USA has already deployed the cluster bombs down to Ukraine, there is no guarantee that they're going to use it if we, the members of the world, the Commonwealth of Nations, step, drop our foot down that this is wrong. We know when the USA refused to be part of the Kyoto covenant about climate change, they gave their reasons, and we allowed them not to join the Kyoto Convention. And we also know that USA, for some business or commercial reasons, have refused to ban cluster bombs. But part of the European Union and the Schengen state have all banned cluster bombs. And I think those cluster bombs will be used in the soils of Europe, not in the soils of USA where they are not banned. Cluster bombs are banned in the EU. And I believe that nations like France, UK, Germany should tell them that this is not right. There are better ways to win this war, which is by negotiation, not by dropping cluster bombs. As I said to you, whether it kills today, it has the potential to kill in the next 6 months because the bomblets are well and alive. A farmer, after 6 years, a farmer may be using a tractor to work, and boom, it keeps killing. Many countries where cluster bombs have been used, like Cambodia, their president has been begging Zelensky, do not use this thing, telling Russia, stop using this thing. And I don't know why USA are so determined because it doesn't happen in their shores. I think the community of nations, UN sounds very silent about all those things, and I think they're losing their respect. UN are not stepping their foot hard to say that this is wrong. Russia don't use cluster bombs because if you allow these cluster bombs to use, if somebody use a nuclear warfare tomorrow, are you going to blame the person? So I think there is war has still got a level of regulation. Whatever war you're fighting, whatever fight you're fighting, there is still level of human rights regulation. And if we don't stop this cluster bomb usage, once it starts raining down, tomorrow we can have a nuclear missile also raining down. And what are we going to blame? Russians, Ukrainians are going to suffer. And mostly 90% Ukrainians, these cluster bombs may be deployed on the soils of Ukraine. And the worst thing in war is never allow a war to be fought in your background. Never allow a war to be fought in your land. Because all these missiles, all these munitions, all these bomblets, all these unexploded munitions are still waiting to harm and to slaughter the nations where this war is being fought. And 90% of those war, if not 99%, are being fought on the soils of Ukraine. Mr. Zelensky, I saw him yesterday in Lithuania. There's this clip that shows where he was standing alone, isolated from the meeting. He has to know that this is not only about him. Putin has to know this is not only about him. This is wrong. Human beings are dying. The level of poverty, inflation, and Germany is already crying that they cannot sustain the lack of gas coming in from Russia for the next upcoming winter. And honestly, US has to stop this. Russia has to stop this. The world has
Okay.
to step in and say, stop this war. It's
If I
not
may,
safe for
if,
humanity.
if I may, Mr. Onyeko, this is the exact reason why war is discouraged. And from the get-go, this was not encouraged in the beginning. But for those who have reservations about how effective the United Nations has been, which you've raised a point on, it's exactly for the same reason. And you make an interesting argument where you say, has the United Nations done enough? Even in the instance of using cluster bombs to try and dissuade the U.S. from sending them, and even discourage both forces, Russia and Ukraine, from using the ones that they do have. In the space within this war, there are reports that 9 Russian generals have already lost their lives. Russia has not confirmed this, but the latest incident, I beg your pardon, where a general lost his life was as a result of a Storm Shadow missile strike that was given, a British Storm Shadow missile strike from Ukraine that happened somewhere near Berdyansk. So this war continues to claim lives of precious people on both sides, and everybody is precious. So as this continues at the expiration of this NATO summit, what would you like to see from other countries? The NATO summit seems to all have been about the Ukraine accepting, NATO accepting Ukraine as a member, and the solidification of all the allies' unity with Ukraine. But not much was said in the way of peace. What can other countries do? Where would you like to see other peace efforts come from, even though China has tried, Brazil has tried, Africa has tried? Saudi Arabia as well.
Honestly, I think for some reason, my opinion would say that the United States of America is the big elephant in the room. Why do I say that? I believe for business purposes, for business reasons, for incomes, I believe that the United States of America has an interest in the quantity and the volume of gas and energy that Russia sells to most part of the EU. Example, to Germany, being the biggest economy in EU, which led to Nord Stream 1 and even the gas expressway called the Nord Stream 2. And we all knew how one of those pipeline was mysteriously bombed, and even the EU and the UN that promised to investigate who bombed it. Up to today, after how many months, there's no information. So I think, with all due respect, that USA needs to understand that we love them, we appreciate them playing the world plea, but at times they put their selfish interest beyond lives of human beings. As I'm talking to you today, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of Africans in the borders of Libya and Tunisia. It's so nasty that for days they were taken off from Tunisia and abandoned there. The US is not speaking, the UN is not speaking, the African Union is not doing enough. Talk about the war in Sudan. Everybody rejected the negotiation of the US and Saudi because people are beginning to lose faith. Now, look at Israel. Israel refused to send their Iron Dome air defense system to help the Ukrainians because they are scared that it could fall into the hands of Iran, because obviously it seems that Russia has a good relationship with Iran. And if that happens, Iran may be able to pass intelligence information to Palestine about the weaknesses in the Iron Dome air defense of the Israelis. So even the storm shadow that has been sent to Ukraine, it's been captured. And obviously the technology behind it is being examined. The same thing to the Russians' weapons and the hypersonic missiles. Even the F-16 we've been talking about. F-16 does not win war. What wins war is marksmanship that wins war. What wins war is the heart and the minds of the men in the front line. What wins war is intelligence. What wins war is propaganda machines that you deploy. What wins war is, where do you fight the war? On your soil or on a foreign soil? So generals are being killed left, right, and center. Budanov in Ukraine have not been heard about. Generals in Russia has been killed. Even Americans have been killed. I repeat, Americans have been killed. Foreign soldiers fighting in Ukraine have been also been killed. So lives are being lost, but it's all about propaganda. So the bottom line is, it is sad year, and I believe the election year next year that people have to start thinking that we need to stop this war before the winter steps in, because it will get horrible, and this has to stop. It is wrong.
Both sides survived well, Ukraine, that is, survived the winter of last year. We hope it doesn't get to the winter of this year and make it a winter, another winter of war. Thank you so much, Mr. Vincent Oyekwelu, National Security Risk Strategist and a former British police officer who joined us from Anambra State in southeast Nigeria. Thank you for being a part of the program this morning.
Thanks for having me. Good morning once again.
Good morning. Ukraine's tennis star Elena Svitolina says Russia's invasion of her country has made her mentally stronger on the tennis court. Please stay with us.
Incredible. What a finish to the match from Marketa Vondrousova.
Roman Abramovich, the Russian billionaire, will challenge European Union sanctions imposed on him after the Ukraine war, arguing that the restrictions were imposed simply because he's a well-known person, Russian person, a source familiar with the matters has disclosed. After Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered tens of thousands of troops into Ukraine on February the 24th, 2022, the EU slapped sanctions on Russian officials and a host of Russian businessmen, while freezing hundreds of billions of dollars of Russian assets. The EU in March 2022 described Mr. Abramovich as an oligarch who has close ties to President Vladimir Putin, including privileged access to the Kremlin chief, connections the EU says that helped him maintain his assets. Finally, Ukrainian tennis star Elena Svitolina says Russia's invasion of her country has made her mentally stronger on the tennis court as she continues a stunning run of form at Wimbledon. Svitolina, who returned to tennis this year following the birth of her daughter in October, reached a Grand Slam semi-final for the third time in her career on Tuesday, ousting world number one Iga Swiatek 7-5, 6-7, 6-2. The former world number 3 received a wild-card entry for Wimbledon, but now has a chance to reach her first ever major final when she faces Czech Republic's Marketa Vondrousova today. That will cap off a whirlwind period in her career during which she's been at the forefront of tennis humanitarian relief efforts for Ukraine. The 28-year-old says the war, combined with the birth of her daughter, has changed her perspective on life and sports. She says in her words, "Mentally, I don't take difficult decisions as a disaster," she said, after her victory against Swiatek. "There are worse things in life. I'm just more calm." And this is where we call it a day for this edition of the special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Many thanks to our producers and our guests, and of course to you, our viewers, for being with us. Please join us again tomorrow for another edition. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Have a good day.